PCX needs very little introduction. He's one of, if not the most hyped monster in Pillar Chase 2 history, and is responsible for a lot of people starting to play the game in the first place. But he's also, from what I've personally seen myself, a reason a lot of people have started to play this game less and less. This monster is controversial, to say the least. I haven't even begun to mention his long history of balance changes and reworks that have made him so difficult to make a video about in the first place. I don't think I've seen a character as hated as PCX, and despite this, I don't think I've ever seen more diamonds in the wild than a diamond PCX, and he's only been out for roughly 2 to 3 months. This video will be similar to my Fogboard and Rosemary video, but different in a lot of ways, as I'll be diving into the community responses to this character, as well as the likely reasons why he's been reworked so many times in his short lifespan. Naturally, I think everyone is going to have their own thoughts, opinions, and feelings on PCX, and won't agree with everything I say in this video. That's fine. The important part is that we, as a community, start talking about this character in a more healthy manner. This monster is incredibly difficult to talk about, as I've said, and as such, I won't go into the specific stat details for this character in a lot of areas. Instead, I'll just be talking about the overall design and methods and all that other stuff. If you see my Fogborn and Rosemary video, you'll know that this probably isn't how I usually do things. This is mostly because I'm not confident about PCX staying in the state that he's currently in, so I won't go super in-depth about specific cooldowns, stats, and thresholds of any of the characters, in my verbal speech at least. I will put them on screen. I just want to clarify that as I'm writing this script, Blade is literally pushing balance updates to PCX. This monster's so incredibly difficult to talk about, so I'm just not going to waste my time. PCX's philosophy has always been a speed over stamina monster. His current stats are 28 sprint speed, 35 stamina, and 20 damage per hit on an average attack cooldown with a fairly small hitbox. That's enough to 5-shot a survivor, but it's not his only way of dealing damage. His first ability is Found You. This ability has remained relatively unchanged compared to everything else during PCX's long history of balance changes, and has been with him since day one. This ability is generally just a more aggressive version of Thunder Warp that deals 25 damage upon exiting. Missing it generally has very little end lag and doesn't really hurt PCX all that much, as they'll still be in a position to start a chase. This ability can also fly, making it very good for PCX to close the gap with people who are on the high ground or using a cliff or something. As such, it can be generally used as an ambushing chase starter or a mid-chase option and pressure tool. PCX's current second ability is You Can't Run, which you can think of almost like a Demo Knight charge from TF2 or Billy's Chainsaw from Dead by Daylight. All PCX does is charge forward at an increasingly faster rate, and then if he catches a survivor, he deals 2 instances of 25 damage for a total of 50. The initial start of this ability has a lot of turn control, but as it speeds up, you'll have less and less control over it. This ability also quite unreliably interacts with surfaces such as slopes and slight changes in elevation. There's a lot of ways you can use this ability, from suddenly surprising people or at really close ranges. It punishes people super hard who are trying to juke you, and is generally a super easy move to land. It also really likes server delay. It's also really good at punishing people who run out of stamina against you, which people will absolutely be doing. If you hit someone with Found You and You Can't Run in the same life, that would deal a total of 75 damage, meaning you'd still have to hit them twice with your basic attack in order to kill them. This isn't really as bad as it sounds. It's very easy to get these hits with how fast PCX is, and especially his last ability, Jump. Jump is exactly what it says it is. PCX jumps, and the height of it is based on how long you hold the button. This ability also significantly propels PCX forward even faster, making it a good option to use in order to close the gap. It'll deal an extra 15 damage if you land on someone. The damage is basically just an extra. He doesn't really need it at all to be effective, it just helps. PCX's current game plan is to just rush down each survivor one by one. It's not really hard to do, nor is it very complex, and he has no real issue tracking down and killing any of these survivors either. Due to his pretty bad stamina economy, he's very reliant on staying committed to a target, or going after people he thinks has less stamina to work with at that moment to secure those kills. This isn't too different from other speedy monsters, with the only real difference being how good PCX is doing at it in comparison to them. Really, I'd say he's super easy to play in the state he's currently in right now. There is one last part of PCX's kit though, Final Act. There's no real nice way to put it, this ability sucks. Not only is it just really boring and repetitive, but it fundamentally handicaps PCX. The ability puts you into an obstacle course in which survivors get a head start, but it's really just structured for them to survive as long as they know what they're doing. Making even just one tiny mistake is enough for a bone-broken survivor to be able to fully escape it. And yes, you heard me there. Some PCX players will bone break a survivor intentionally and then leave them for last for Final Act. I tried doing this and I felt disgustingly terrible for doing it, and I already feel guilty playing PCX in the first place. Honestly, I think the reason Final Act exists in the first place is to handicap PCX. He's able to cross a map in seconds with Found You, and once he starts a chase with someone, it's basically impossible to lose him because of his first two abilities and his overwhelming speed. Final Act will waste about 30 seconds, and he's absolutely capable of killing a survivor in that window. He just has to play very well to secure it.
What is going on with this game? Ah!
Now, there's something I want to ask a lot of the player base that's been here since PCX's release. Have you noticed anything different about him? I mean, outside of the countless balance changes, of course. When it comes to PCX, I feel as if there's been a notable shift in direction. The major design theme with PCX originally was meant to be a high-skill monster that was given direct rewards upon using his ability successfully. The reward, in specific, was stamina. Naturally, this idea had some problems. Namely, PCX's only real weakness at the time, and still kind of is, his stamina. People pointed out that a monster using their ability successfully was kind of just them doing the bare minimum, and PCX shouldn't be rewarded by the game by making his most glaring weakness a lot more tolerable. This idea was at its best at around the time of the Jeff update, in my opinion. Found You costed 15 stamina to use, and he would only get that 15 stamina back if he successfully landed the attack. As for God Unbound, it was a high-risk, high-reward maneuver that gave you a very high stamina drain rate but massively buffed your stats and let you regain stamina on hit. It had a very situational use, but it was extremely powerful in those situations. I personally found PCX to be at its most fun state during this time period. My abilities were strong, but I had to use them properly, and if I failed, I'd be punished pretty hard. It made each use of it exciting, as well as extra satisfying when I landed these attacks. And then, now we're here where we are today. Found You doesn't cost stamina to use anymore, nor does it give you any. You Can't Run is a much more dynamic ability than God Unbound, and I like it more, but it also doesn't mess with stamina at all, for better or for worse. Jump also doesn't really have anything to do with stamina anymore either. This is a big deal. The core philosophy behind PCX's design has pretty much been uprooted and replaced now, and I'm not sure what it's meant to be. As far as I can tell, he's now just meant to be a much more normal chase monster that's basically impossible to get away from him unless he decides to drop chase and switch targets for whatever reason. While this change likely makes him easier to play to the average PCX player, it makes him not only very simple to play with not nearly as much of a skill demand, but now he's slightly intruding on a lot of the territory of other monsters, especially MX. Don't get me wrong, MX is still one of the stronger monsters in this game. But, in my opinion, PCX is the stronger character. And now that PCX is pretty easy to play and no longer has any of his original design philosophy, there's a lot more overlap between these two than there used to be. And in some cases, PCX is just outright more equipped and stronger. MX can't locate people without a kill, significantly hurting his endgame potential and making it possible for him to outright lose a slippery survivor. PCX can press one button and find a survivor on a 13-second cooldown. Charging Demise is a highly committal move that's situational in chase, can't turn, and punishes him for colliding with a wall, and is typically used as mobility for this reason. PCX has a low commitment charge move that can generally be used in pretty much every situation during a chase. He can turn, and it doesn't punish him when he collides with a wall. He has no need to use it for mobility, as he has better options for such a thing. MX has intentional end lag on many of the things he does to give him a clear window and trade-offs for his strength. PCX has very little end lag on any of his moves, even when used improperly. There's a lot more comparisons to make here, but in almost every instance, PCX generally has a better answer or alternative than MX has. And now that PCX no longer seems to be following his unique design philosophy, he's intruding a little bit too much on the other monsters' territories.
Oh.
So, what's the actual problem with PCX? If you ask me, there's three major issues. Firstly, the speed over stamina archetype is actually an incredibly hard archetype to design for, especially when you're going as extreme on it as you need to for a Sonic character, because it's Sonic.exe, it's an extremely rigid design philosophy they have to follow. PCX kind of just needs to be fast, given he's Sonic. He needs to be the fastest. It wouldn't make sense for him to not be one of the most mobile characters in the game, as that's kind of the identity of both Sonic and Sonic.exe. But because he's so extreme, he's put into a really volatile state of balance, where he's likely either going to be too good due to how valuable his speed and other abilities are, or too bad given how extreme his stats are that he's so weak in other areas. The source material of this character makes him surprisingly difficult to work with, as there's no way he couldn't be in this rigid archetype of being the fastest. Secondly, I personally don't think the core issues people have with PCX have ever really been addressed across all of his many reworks. The issue has, and still is, survivor agency. Survivors feel like there's very little they can do against a PCX that has even a basic understanding of how to play him. There's a lot of reasons for this, but I think the main one is that survivors feel like they have no real way to shake him off their tail, and that's because there really isn't. The only way you can make a PCX drop chase against you is by making him change targets. He has the tools not only to close the gap, but to track you and locate you on command, which is a pretty rare tool for these types of monsters to have. This, combined with just how strong he is in the chase, makes a lot of survivors really just hate playing against him. At the start of the video, I mentioned I know several people who have started playing this game a lot less because of PCX, and each case was about this issue. I should stress that monsters do need a method of killing survivors, and they do need to be strong and efficient at it. PCX isn't in the wrong for being a strong monster that can kill efficiently. He often just makes survivors feel powerless in a particular type of way that people just find bad enough to complain about the most of any monster out there. The third point, and I think this is actually the most poignant and important point for the future of PCX, is bias. If you've played Pillar Chase 2 a lot as of late December and early January, you likely have some pretty strong feelings about this monster and his design. For a lot of people that don't like PCX, there's nothing Blade can really do to make him fun for them to go against other than completely gutting the character. And even then, they'll resent the monster and hate playing against him even if he's terrible, and it's all because of their first experiences with the monster were so miserable. This is a real thing that happens. Dead by Daylight has a similar issue with a handful of their killers. Some of them were really strong at one point, then got nerfed into the ground. Despite how less of an issue the killer now is, people still hate these killers for when they were strong, and still hate going against them whenever they're in a match. PCX did not have a good first impression, and the tumultuous time after his release didn't help either. A lot of people were put off by this, and simply because of human nature, there's not much that can be done. No matter what Blade really does with the character, it's not going to change people's first impressions. It's very hard for people to keep an open mind. It's especially telling when there's basically two extreme sides of the discussion now that have sprouted up over PCX. On one hand, you have people who hate his design for a variety of possible reasons. These people are always happy to see him get anything resembling a nerf, even if it's a more extreme one that he doesn't really deserve, and would generally be happy if PCX was completely gutted and, at the most extreme, removed from the game. Again, think back to the DBD example I gave. On the other hand, you have people who are huge fans of PCX or Sonic.exe. These are people who got into Diamond super fast, or just, again, really big fans. These people probably really like the power fantasy of being Sonic.exe and just the fun that comes with that. However, these people can also act like almost every little balance change or rework to him that he gets is always objectively worse, and aren't keeping a very open mind to what Blade is trying to do with the character. Obviously, not everyone falls into either category. This is just something you can observe in the community for yourself by just paying a bit of attention. This can also just make it harder for Blade to get a proper read on the community when some of the extreme parts of the community have their own agendas and biases. The evil horse just wants to make the best version of the character he can that'll please the most people, but people aren't very objective when it comes to PCX. There's nothing any of us can really do about this side of the issue. The long history of changes in discourse surrounding him have already done its damage, and people are still arguing about it as I'm making this video. Simply asking everyone to put their biases aside and keep an open mind is just unrealistic. All I can really ask is that you, the viewer, just try and keep an open mind yourself where possible about these topics.
I'm guessing... I guess that's the end of the game, so...
I don't really even know what to do or say as a conclusion because this video was a lot more complicated than usual, and I already suck at making conclusions. I guess I can say it's kind of funny how one FNF mod back in 2021 led to a domino effect of Sonic.exe becoming a mainstream icon again. That domino effect eventually led to this bloody blue rodent being the hottest topics in one of my favorite Roblox games. Just a second ago, I was talking about biases. I think it's important I make my own known for the sake of keeping this video in good faith, especially towards the PCX fans. I am personally not that much of a fan of PCX, and in this video, I tried to keep as open of a mind as I could. He's absolutely not a monster for me. I mentioned earlier he's a monster I feel guilty about playing him due to my own first impressions and how strong he currently is in my eyes. I don't really have that much fun playing against him either as a survivor. This actually made it really hard for me to gather footage playing as him, because I just didn't like it. This is just my opinion, and I'm totally fine with others not feeling this way. I'm only really saying it because my bias absolutely did influence this video. Part of me is telling me that PCX is in the best state he's ever really been in for the health of the game. Another part of me is telling me I just don't like this monster on both sides of the game, and that he's stupid and overpowered and a lot of silly things like that. I think that's one of the best takeaways I can really give you in this video, as I think PCX, who has had a lot of discussion around him, hurt because of everyone's own unique biases. It's a lot easier to talk about a monster who isn't constantly getting rebalanced. It's a lot easier to talk about a monster who isn't as culturally omnipotent as Sonic.exe nowadays. Regardless of my own thoughts, PCX feels like a monster that isn't quite ready for a deep dive into strategy and stat discrepancies as some of the other monsters in this game. I still think that Blade will be fine-tuning this monster for quite some time, but it feels like he's finally settling into the game, even if it's a couple months after his release. One of the first videos I ever really wanted to make was a PCX video, and that was back in January. It was even harder to talk about him, as the near daily changes PCX underwent made it impossible for me to say anything about the conversation in a video format. It just moved way too fast. Really, PCX is a very tragic monster to me. I remember how excited everyone was for him to finally be added to the game, only for opinions to quickly sour as people began to argue about all these different things. Launch PCX and Launch Inkfell were some of the two strongest characters this game has ever really seen in recent memory in the community, and these characters were back to back. I do think they're developing around this, as new monsters they tend to release are on the average to weaker side now, and they slowly adjust them over time. They don't want new monsters to be received like these two were. Oh well. If you like this video, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting your own thoughts, all that stuff. I'd like to let my viewers decide video topics more, so if that sounds interesting, just keep an eye out for my community polls. I'll take my leave now. The next video will most likely, no promises, be about Niloticus. I'll have a lot more substantial analysis of his kit and strategies, as well as a lot less vague things to say about some of his other video topics. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.